I am, like, this is, I think, one of the most exciting parts of the program for all of us. General Blaine Holt, Brigadier General Blaine Holt, now retired, I'd say the first thing that's remarkable about him is he gave up his spot for Stacy Busjanik, right? And decided to stick around. So cheers to him for that. He has the most incredibly distinguished military career. I really urge you to check out his bio, not just the bio on the site, just Google him. This man is not only a great soldier, but also an inexhaustible entrepreneur and a true patriot, we are really lucky to have him. He's now the CEO of Alchemy, which is a cutting-edge AI company, helping Fortune 500 companies harden their supply chains. But that's just a very short example or small example of the type of work that he does in the tech community to help them now that he's retired. He's touched so many other companies with his energetic approach and his devotion to the country. His military service is amazing. I mean, he led the logistics of the Afghan surge, and he single-handedly quelled the civil unrest in Kyrgyzstan, one of the former republics of the Soviet Union, which was a key launching area for the Afghan war. He rose to be designated by the Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces in Europe as the #1 strategist and innovator. I mean, that's quite a title, and culminating a career in logistics. And what I think is of most interest to me and perhaps to all of you is that his service included being the second highest ranking U.S. military official at NATO, representing the U.S. in negotiations with the alliance in the years 2014 and 2015. And guess what happened in 2014? That was the Maidan Revolution, the Ukrainian revolution. So I'm going to stop and bring General Holt to the stage, and please give him a warm welcome. General Holt.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Good afternoon. So, listen, I know everybody just had lunch. You got to break the food coma. And if not, I'm going to call you right out. Promise I will. I'm a kinetic speaker, and my last name, Holt, usually is equated to holtage. There's a high holtage environment about to happen here. First off, I want to say thank you very much to Roman and Dan and the NDIA. I've always been a huge fan of NDIA. When I was on active duty and I worked for the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief as the Commander's Action Group, we had a really amazingly integrated relationship because I do believe that our defense industrial base, now during my remarks you might challenge what I'm about to say, and that's okay. I am a huge proponent and fan of a healthy defense industrial base, okay? And we have to have one, and we have to have champions like NDIA out there to kind of watch that. What I mean by healthy doesn't just mean a bunch of Goliaths and then there's a bunch of little guys who are trying to get into the stream. It means that there's room for innovation, there's room for entrepreneurship, and we've got to make it easier for small business and innovators to get in, going, and do so in a protected environment, protected on their IP, protected on contracts and what they're doing. And so I am a huge advocate for entrepreneurship where it comes to the nation's defense. Okay. A little bit about me, and I won't get into my bio because thank you very much for the introduction. It was wonderful, but the name of my consulting company even is Irascible Strategic Advisors. Irascible being my nickname from the Air Force. Now that word literally means an angry person. And the reason that I picked that up is because what gets my clock going is the status quo. or this is the way we've always done it, or this is the system, there's nothing you can do to change it, right? My little brother, who many of you in the room know, he's a 2-star on active duty still. He's a contracting officer for the Air Force, Cameron Holt. He shares that with me. And he has been devoted to trying to crush bureaucracy and make spend easier and smarter, and he's still working on that and will until he's gone. This is kind of the scene setter for what I want to talk about today. Now, some of you might have seen me every morning on Newsmax talking about the Ukraine war because of my background and experience. If you want to talk about that and we have some questions, that's fine. I'll bring in a little bit of that. But where I want to spend my time today is, first off, I'm not going to get technical. There's been enough technical stuff here on CMMC2. My own little startup company and network risk for supply chain, we're definitely on that path to go do the same things. And I really appreciated the last panel on some of the cart horse or catch-22 stuff that we see with implementation of these programs. I don't get into any of that, okay? I'm a pilot, flew a lot of years. If you ask me how a jet engine works, I'm just going to tell you it's magic, okay? Because that's the level of detail you need to know. Now, you might want to know something about getting into a field where they want to shoot you down. That's my specialty. But on the tech side of the house, I've got really superior people who do the tech thing. And then when I'm sitting down describing network risk in a supply chain environment, of which I know a lot about, I'll just say it's magic. We'll tell you that Billy's Bolts is going out of business in about 4 weeks, and you better replace Billy. But on that path, there's this CMMC2 thing, there's this cyber threat. And where I really want to kind of help today with the conversation is to kind of push that aside and talk about my background as a strategist. Okay? I live in the future, and I always have. So everybody I've worked for, Stervitas, Petraeus, Breedlove, I'm the one who's sitting there going, storm's coming. Storm's coming, we're in trouble. And that's where I've earned basically a lot of my money. I'm here today to talk about cyber warfare because I think we're in trouble. And I know that we can probably, because there's a lot of practitioners in the room, sense what that trouble might be. I want to put a finer point on it. We are in trouble because we have built ribbons and ribbons and ribbons of procedure, bureaucracy, definitions that are not any longer in alignment with what the real meaning of cyber warfare is. That's my argument today. And if you want to throw a rock, throw the rock. Just understand, I'll debate you. Cyber warfare is no longer just about DDoS, malware, I took your identity away from you, I did a ransomware, I shut. Those are all cyber, they're in the cyber domain. But what my argument is that there is no domain in the DoD. There is no domain in the civilian sector now that is not permeated with cyber. Cyber is like air. It's everywhere. And it's not, I don't even like the word. I like the word fusion. I like if you think about how the Russians like to go to war, they like hybrid warfare. They're obviously miserable at kinetic warfare. I think we can agree to that. But they're very effective in applying different cyber effects to get to an outcome. And by the way, all the tools are not sitting on a keyboard. Some of the tools are actually human resources that appear in and appear out of things at the right moment in time. Case in point. Let's say you are number 2 at a big social media firm, and you're going through your week. And I now want to have you become part of my weapon set that I'm going to use to influence operations in the U.S. Congress. You might have had a bad week. There could be a car accident you didn't know you were going to have. Something disrupted you. And now I start to put information bits in your life that are all coordinated. And you don't understand this, but you're actually meeting people that I wanted to put into your world. And I am constantly barraging you with information packets in several different modalities. Okay? And maybe I'll tag you with a denial of service thing. Maybe I'll do that. But I'm going to raise and lower your temperature. I'm going to start to control your emotions. And then I'm going to insert the decision I want you to make on something or inspire you to get after something. I might show you an article from a congressman that gets your blood boiling, and now you're ready to go do what I want you to do. Is that cyber? It absolutely is cyber. It absolutely is cyber. That's my argument, is I can bring together any type of resource, digital or analog, and I can fuse them to get to an outcome. And here's where it gets really crazy. That was a state actor event that I just described, and it's real and it happened. Okay? Do companies go to war with each other? They do. One of the things that we're developing as a vertical in our software is the ability to detect adversarial logistics. Now, that could be a state actor thing where the Chinese company rebrands and buys a Swiss company who buys Billy's bolts in your fourth tier, and I just messed up your fighter weapons program because I dissolved the company and got rid of Billy and all of his folks. And they were an 8-year qualification because of the way the material had to be made. Does that happen on civilian versus civilian company? Oh, yeah, you bet it does. Right? So do civilian companies have defense-grade weapons or detectability? No, they don't. They've got a little bit. Depends on who you are. If you're Lockheed, you probably can afford a whole suite of things. Things that we don't even know about. But if you're Sally's missile fins, you probably don't. You're pretty uncovered. And you're very vulnerable. We have to take a broader view of cyber, and here's why. We're ill-prepared for this future. And we're going to experience really deleterious effects as people hone these weapons that are multi-layered and come to an effect to get to a place they want to be. We have to get better detection capability that that's actually happening. We have to have the ability to understand that that key target is going through that week I just described. Okay? You know, hey, listen, you're getting a phone call from the FBI, you're being played. What? Yep, come back. I know we're going to walk you through the entire thing. We don't have that. We don't have that. But on the weapons side of the house, and here's the cool part, I have no security clearance, so I can't make a mistake today. We have to develop the countermeasures to those worlds, okay? And we have to develop offensive tools, some of which I would actually support putting into the hands of civilians to say, this is your ability to detect and have attribution where necessary. This is the other thing that we're missing. We don't have a rules of engagement that's really clearly defined for industry. We don't have a rules of engagement about what happens in reporting. We think we do, but you just saw that panel up here, and they went through ribbons and ribbons of what are you supposed to do, who are you supposed to do it to, because what do we do in the government? We created, what, NIST 171. Okay, there's that. Now we've got FedRAMP, and I'll spackle that over the top of it. And now let's do CMMC over the top of that. So for the poor little guy, the little CEO who's trying to build a company, I can't afford those attorneys for that. To kind of translate through that stuff for me and read that to me, I can't be an operational business person. And I could have one of the best software, I do have one of the best software packages for supply chain available. And we're just going to keep packing this stuff on because the government doesn't change stuff. They just add to their bureaucracy. This is why NDIA is important. You all have to unify. NDIA has to make a statement about there are things that are non-monetary that are getting in the way of industry. We're not going to continue to have a healthy defense industrial base if we're going to be at the end of the whip in bureaucracy. And we'll certainly be very vulnerable to these types of cyber attacks. Influence operations. There's a variety of definitions that we throw out in the DoD joint manuals all the time to put everything in its proper little stovepipe. And at the Joint Interagency Task Force that I call the Department of No, they pop things into their proper little silos. Oh, that's cyber. Oh, that's info ops. Oh, that's influence ops. Oh, that's kinetic. rip it all out. That's not the way to look at cyber. I understand we need protocols, and I understand we need certifications, and I understand that we have to deliver product that, to the very best of our ability, is protected. There is no question about that. You can't have romper room. But I'm so worried that we've given ourselves such a complex jungle at the CMMC 2.0 level to navigate, like we do with the jungle called DFARS, that we have blinded ourselves to the threat that's coming in the future and ill-prepared ourselves to face that threat and face that world. Because that world is the fusion world. That world says, and let me get this straight, an airborne sensor plus 2 spies plus these cyber hackers out of this country plus manipulation in the stock market got to this place. And it's going to be real bad for us. That's a cyber op. I'm sorry, it is. And it's got cyber at the base of it. But we don't operate that way, and we've got to start stretching ourselves and thinking in 3 dimensions here. Because that's how the folks who want to come after us are going to think. Okay? And back to my Russian example, what are they good at? What are they good at? So let's think this through. Everybody is looking at what the disaster that is the Russian army is doing. They thought it was going to be a blitzkrieg. It's going to be 96 hours. We're in Kiev. Xi Jinping signs off on it. We're good. And the war goes to hell in a handbasket. A week before the war, I was even like, if the Russian army embarrasses itself here, we're going to see atrocities because they'll have nothing left. And now we're seeing some really bad stuff. But that's just one layer of war. So now let's put the strategist mind back onto it. Watch the birdie. Russia's losing in Ukraine. Let's go to where Ukraine started. And yes, 2014 in Crimea, actually back to 1994 when we talked them out of their nukes. But in 2018, something happened that nobody paid attention to it because it wasn't a security issue. The Russians divested themselves of all of their U.S. treasuries. That should have caught the DoD's attention. And I can tell you it did not. The second thing they did, which should have been equally disconcerting, is they bought 2,100 metric tons of gold. Boom. And then they sat on it. So here we are. We're going to do economic warfare. We're going to put you through the worst sanctions regime any country's ever been. It's going to be awful. And it is awful. For the Russian middle class, this is really a bad world to be in. And all the businesses that are coming out, and Russia's really getting isolated, and it's really just one man and his inner circle's war on this country and the atrocities. And so everybody's like, well, are the sanctions really working at that level? Well, let's think about that. So we got Europe dependent on Russian gas. Europe, Belarus, and China together provide about 50% of the world's food. More. Here come the sanctions, and now Russia just last week said, tell you what, if you want to buy Russian gas because you have no choice, you're going to have to pay in rubles. And the rubles, well, we crushed those on day 1 of sanctions, right? No, it came right back. Why? Because they cut it over and they backed the rubles on the gold they bought. Right? Ha! Imagine that. Was that part of the plan? Yes, it was. So now Europe has to buy that gas with rubles. That means they have to break sanctions, go to the banks of Russia, buy the rubles, pay with rubles, and now all that foreign currency that was depleted right out of the Russian treasury, flowing right back in. Right? So have we really, does Putin have 2 wars going on? Yes, he does. What are the cyber elements in between them? A lot. Influence operations happening on Wall Street, a lot. Influence operations in his own oligarch system to keep him safe, tons. What do we have to do the forensics on this? How do we go back and say, this happened, this happened, this happened, this denial of service happened on this day, this was contributing to this? What happened in the European banking system? The central bank took a hit, the ECB. Were those things related? Yes, they were. It's all related. But what we do, and this is my admonishment, and this is me from the future warning, they don't think that way. They don't think in stovepipes. We're going, wow, he's got a hell of an economic war going. He's got a hell of a kinetic war going. Is anybody paying attention to Israel? Israel is looking to the north at Russia, Syria, Iran, to the east at Iran, doesn't see a best friend in the United States anymore, and is in trouble with terrorism down in as far as Yemen, and has got a doctrine of preemption. That's very dangerous. And the cyber hits down there are incalculable. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Here, we're struggling with even declaring that a cyber attack on us is an act of war. We'll write it down and we'll say it. But do we have a plan to do something about it? And if what I'm saying here, and here's the ray of hope, if we will think in elegant, innovative ways as a group of cyber practitioners and start to think about the targets we want to get after in those more elegant, non-sledgehammer type cyber tools ways, we can shape things. We can change things. You know, the world was really taken aback with the Stuxnet thing. Holy crap, how did that happen? And that looks like it's got the U.S.'s fingerprints on it. And I was going, man, I hope so. I would love to know that my government was doing that. But to be very pointed, we're at a place, and Ukraine ought to be a warning to all of us, that we are on the precipice of great conflict in this world. I believe it'll be born out of food security issues, commodities issues, and this great rivalry of great powers that's reemerged between central planners in the Western democracies and basically neo-Marxists when you calculate what China and Russia and Iran and North Korea represent. And they're vying for control in the world. Innocent lives are hanging in the balance. So as a cyber group, we have to redefine what cyber is. We have to bust through the stovepipes, and then we got to get hyper elegant with other fields, strategists, Army guys, even Army guys, and the rest of all of the disciplines. Look, I love Army guys. I've thrown them out of my airplane for years. They're really only interested in half the flight. Good folks. It's a fusion world now. And as government supporters and government-associated folks, we are stovepipers. And there's just no luxury in that space anymore, in my view. So, with that said, I wanted to provoke your thinking, and now I'll let you provoke mine. But I appreciate your time.
Do we have any questions?
Hi, General. Thank you for your service. How far is the U.S. behind Russia and China and North Korea when it comes to cyber technology and defense? Because I feel that we have kind of just sat back and let them do whatever they want for too many years.
So it's a great question. I don't think we're behind at all. In fact, in many areas, I think we're probably far advanced. The problem is administration and operational art and rules of engagement. So when you think about their side, there is a much looser protocol about, let's say Kazakhstan launches mass identity theft attacks on our systems here, right? Was that state-sponsored, or was it just a bunch of yahoos in Kazakhstan? It's state-sponsored. and so they have constantly found ways to do non-attribution attacks that we're caught in this political gotcha of saying, oh, well, we can't really prove that it was a state thing. And we don't want to know it was a state thing because now we might be at war, so we'll push away. So I think the technology is there for us. I'm not quite sure that being a practitioner of cyber war is where we should be right now.
Next panel, which is starting in about 10 minutes, could you please come to the stage left portion and get mic'd, please? All the panelists need to be mic'd. If you weren't here this morning, you didn't hear that announcement. Okay, I have a question, future General Holt. What happens in January 2023 in Ukraine? What does it look like?
So let me go to what I hope happens. I'll start there. Hopefully, the ground below Vladimir Putin is crumbling fast. He certainly, all these signs are there and indications that the generals around him, he's replacing a few have caught Russian flu. And I am hearing from sources I have in Russia that it's becoming a much more lonely place for Vladimir Putin. Wouldn't want to be his food taster. If Russia wants to come back to the world commons, if Russia wants its middle class back, if Russia wants all the Western businesses pouring back in, then a couple of things have to happen. They've got to take this regime and they've got to hold it to account. Whether that's internally in Russia or it goes to The Hague, it's their choice. But this is a war of Putin and his inner circle versus this nation. It's pent out of this victimhood status and this fantastical idea that he's an incarnate of Peter the Great, and he wants the empire back. And it's obvious now that it's been halted here in Ukraine so far, or this costly, it's not going to get there. If that happens, Russia can come back very, very rapidly. And Russia would just have to restore the integrity of Ukraine and help with the rebuilding of Ukraine. And my hope is that on the Russian side. On the Ukrainian side, and I have been strongly advising this into the Ukrainian circles that I know, Ukraine would do very well to admit that they have been the money laundering center of the universe, a lot of corruption, because the second that the hostilities stop, the Ukrainian people are going to look at Mariupol and all the rest of the ash created, and they're going to start holding Zelensky and the others accountable. The honeymoon phase will be over. So what they would do well to do is to hold themselves accountable, say, we know what got the country here, and we're now going to establish constitution, rule of law, checks and balances government, and we're going to rebuild out of this in this way, and we want help, and we will do that. That is my strategic hope on both sides of the equation to get back to a far better place. What could happen on the negative side is if, and this is my opinion only, this is not anything linked to policy or the DoD, so I want to be very clear about that. If we don't get more active with logistics flow and release of these bureaucracies on what the Ukrainians need in their moment of need, which is right now, we risk this war going right outside of the Ukraine and getting much deeper and bigger. I think Middle East would be next, and then you got to watch what's happening in Asia. However, we right now are giving them enough to have a stalemate. We need to up it. And we have a really golden opportunity to deplete Russian military strength without this thing escalating further. And so
where's this supposed to go?
these atrocities should have us rethinking and saying, you know what, options we weren't considering before are back on the table because we're looking at a genocide. And moreover, we are signatories to the UN Charter. Article 51 has a right to protect, and the world is going to be looking at that soon because, or a responsibility to protect rather, and the world needs to hold itself accountable for that, including us.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, General. Scott Edwards, Summit 7. I'd like to hear your perspective on what you mentioned earlier about the active war designation for cyber attacks and what that means for the insurance industry here in the United States and how that's going to impact the defense industrial base when they can no longer get cyber insurance because of potential active war designations.
Right. So what that touches on is exactly where we sit with a dysfunctional system. And so that's one symptom of a much broader problem, which is we have layers and layers and layers of policy that don't mesh with the realities of today. So I get that there is absolutely disjointedness there with the insurance, and this works in many realms too. What about underwriting supply chains that are under attack? It's the same type of gotcha, but this is the challenge where policymakers now have to rethink what cyber really means and what cyber really is. And then when we start to look at underwriting this, it's going to have to be a new regime. It's going to have to be a different world. I guess what I would caution is I see more peril in defending the status quo and where we're at right now than I do redesigning for a new world, for a new defense world. Both are hard. So if there's no more questions, thank you very much. I appreciate you having me out here.
Oh, sir.